There's no hiding the fact that I love the show Band of Brothers. Over the course of the past few months, I've been breaking down the show, and I also did a video discussing why I feel the show's perfect. But now I'm about to finish another rewatch, and there's something that really stood out to me this time. I find the more I watch it, the more I uncover new things, and this time it was all about the art of making us, the audience, truly experience and understand what these people in front of us were going through. Never have I been more immersed within a show, connected to a group of people, and felt fear, triumph, mourning, and loneliness when watching a TV series. But this one really did master it, and I wanted to take a little look at exactly why that was. So let's get into it. Spoilers ahead, obviously. The camaraderie, brotherhood, and development of the characters. With the show being called Band of Brothers, it would be rather silly if the brotherhood and sense of camaraderie wasn't at the forefront of the show and at the core of the story. But within the show, this story actually thrives on the togetherness of the men and the connection that we saw each and every one of them have with one another. Whether that be the more intimate, close one-on-one connections like what Winters had with Nixon, or the more broader connections such as Lipton and him being there for every single man that needed him at some point. There were complexities and levels of depth to each and every connection that we saw being formed. This was something that also came through and complemented the show when the characters would be developing. It's only when you go back to the start after a rewatch that you see just how far the characters progressed as individuals, and how that ultimately impacted the dynamic of the wider group. It's a stretch to compare the relationships to what I know, because what these men went through is something that a lot of us never have, unless you are a veteran, so it's hard to truly understand the bond and relationships that get formed. But for me, personally, when watching this show, there were a couple of different things that I felt when I saw the different types of relationships and friendships. And it's what I think helped when it came to them coming across the screen and feeling relatable despite being in a completely unrelatable situation. Take Nixon and Winters, for example. They had a direct bond that felt very brotherly. And by that, I mean that Nixon kind of felt like the younger brother, was a little bit less stable than the older brother, which was Winters, and it felt like Richard Winters was always looking out for him. Whether that be in delivering bad news, and even a small thing like being the person that was holding onto the liquor that he wanted to drink. There was a level of trust and a connection that was deep-rooted, almost like a family member. So much so that we even saw them working with each other once they returned home from the war. They were brothers that didn't share DNA. So for those of us that have siblings, whether that in being the older brother or the younger brother, I feel you could kind of relate to the type of bond that they had, and you could really feel the care that they had for one another in the most dangerous and also frustrating of times. Then, when you look at some of the other relationships in the show, such as Malarkey, Compton, Toye and Guarnere, there was a point in episode 7 where we saw that out of all of those men, Malarkey was the only person that was left there after not being seriously wounded or killed. Whenever these men were together, it felt like you were witnessing a group of really good friends. Take the situation and the environment out of the equation, and it's yourself and a few of your close pals together, talking, joking, and catching up. The conversations between these men just felt so real and authentic, and despite the fact that death could reach you at any moment in the blink of an eye, you really connected to the words that they were saying and the relationships that they had. Then, when you add back in that environment and the hostility, when Malarkey is there without any of his closest friends, you feel the weight of it and what he's carrying on his shoulders. Because once upon a time, they were all there together, so it showed the true horrors of what could occur. Then, I'd also say on the opposite side of it all, you've got Doc Eugene Rowe, a man that was quite isolated, on his own, and felt like he didn't truly want to get to know any of the men because he'd seen so many of them die, and it was almost easier for him to not have any kind of connection. Having the different types of togetherness, camaraderie, and mindsets being present on screen really allowed us to connect with the different characters at different moments throughout the show. At the end of the day, we care about the people that we love, the friends that we have, and that was no different in this. You felt the togetherness that was there between them all. Because we got to see so many different sides to so many of the different characters, it genuinely felt like we knew them on a personal level, was a part of that band of brothers, and like we also went through so much with them too. I would also say, in being able to see so many of the men at the start of the series in Camp Toccoa, and then seeing them at the end, they were completely different people. So in witnessing that journey that they underwent from before landing in Normandy to then coming out the other side of the war, the actors did a phenomenal job because no man felt the same as they did at the start. They transformed themselves. For me, the one that really stood out to me was Buck Compton. We saw him at the start of the show being the leader that every man could turn to no matter what they needed, and they'd be alongside him. However, we saw him get wounded, then we saw him become fearful of losing the people that were closest to him. So much so that when Toye and Guarnere were both wounded, it was the final thing that broke him. We saw a man with such strength turn to somebody that still had that strength within him, but he just couldn't do it anymore. That on its own would ordinarily be the main part of a show or movie that we're watching, but that was just one of so many different journeys and arcs that we went on. The real people being depicted on screen were just so well constructed and delivered, and the depths of the relationships was something that contributed to that. With regards to the authenticity of the Brotherhood, that was something that was also extremely convincing. Before the filming of the show began, many of the main cast were sent to a boot camp where they had to leave their identities at the door and they were referred to by the person that they'd be depicting, and they were treated as if they were training to drop in Normandy in the Second World War. This was something which was documented by Ron Livingston and is available to watch, so I'd highly suggest it because it's an extremely insightful documentary piece. They were treated like they were soldiers and embarking onto war, were training for that, and this allowed them to form some kind of togetherness and have an authentic brotherhood. Rather than just having actors in a room, these men were being prepared for war and were treated as if they were going off for it. And I feel that's something that most likely bonds a group of people like nothing else could. So the fact that the cast were put through that, it's something that definitely adds to the friendships being performed on screen, because they were actually brothers by the time it came around to filming the show. The realness of the people. The 101st Airborne Division was a real thing, and as you know if you've watched the show, the real-life veterans feature at the start of every episode, except the finale where they were featured at the end, where we ultimately find out which veterans we've been hearing from. The fact that the real-life people being depicted in the show by actors actually existed is something which helped when it came to shaping the performances on screen. The level of detail that the showrunners went into when it came to casting the actors, and also giving them their own personal work to do, is something that really does come through in the final product. For example, it was said that when the actors were assigned their roles, they were given a document which had details about the real-life person that they'd be depicting, and at the end of the document, there was a number for them to be able to reach out to them if they were alive, and if not, then a family member or wife. And if they wanted to, they could reach out to them, and if the veteran was comfortable with it, they'd go and meet them and speak with them so that they could truly understand what the veteran went through, the friendships that they had with other men from Easy Company, and behavioral traits and characteristics. This is something that you can definitely see came through in the show, because there was a level of realness to these characters in the way that they behaved that just wouldn't have been possible without them having actually existed and been able to learn from them or their family members. The real people, the story, the characters, the performances, and the connection that we had to the people being depicted in this show is something that I honestly don't think has been replicated since. Even with the likes of the Pacific and Masters of the Air, it just wasn't able to achieve it to the level that Band of Brothers did. I felt like I knew these people, I went on a journey with them, and I mourned them when they were killed in action or were wounded and were no longer around. It's a strange experience to feel when watching a show, but that's the beauty that lies within Band of Brothers. There just isn't another show like it, and it provided characters that were just exquisitely performed, and it shone a light on the real-life heroes that deserved their moment. So, there you have it. If you want to see a breakdown of every episode of Band of Brothers, then click on the card in the top corner. There's a playlist where I delve into every episode, or alternatively, you can head over to the channel where you'll find videos on Masters of the Air and the Pacific too. How many times have you seen Band of Brothers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.